in India that has already been done in China is the building out of infrastructure that doesn't damage the air as much, because increasingly India and China are both building out solar and wind. And so if India were to have a lot of its public transportation reliant on that new clean energy that is being built up, that would take a lot of the fossil fuels out of the air. India is also a champion in two-wheeled EV production, like Tata and other companies. If a lot of those can move towards EVs and a lot of those can move away from ICE vehicles over time, that would also be transformative. Slash and burn agricultural activities were simply banned in favor of mulching and other activities. What this really involved in China's case is the use of agronomists, scientist farmers who were trained in the cities, trained at universities, and went out to agricultural areas. And for the farmers that were willing to participate, learned new modern agricultural techniques. Obviously, burning is not just bad for the air, it's actually bad for the soil itself. I've studied the Belt and Road Initiative and China's investment.
Welcome, viewers of the Indian Express. I'm Flora Swain, and the AQI in Delhi has been grabbing headlines for the last 1 month, oscillating between the severe and very poor category. The Indian capital city is literally choking with air pollution. Now, a decade ago, another popular city, another major country capital, Beijing, was known to be one of the most polluted cities in the entire world. But then China took it upon itself to rid its capital city of this tag. China has done a lot in the last 1 decade in terms of air pollution and noise pollution, and has sort of combated this environmental man-made disaster. And to discuss all this, we are joined by an American journalist who has been reporting live from China for over 13 years, Jason Smith, who's the host of Bridge to China podcast. Jason, thank you for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Jason, so first off, as a guy who has been in the country for the last 13 years, how how do you see Beijing populated, and how has it changed over the years?
Absolutely. When I moved here in 2012, the air was in fact polluted most days. In the winter, you could smell the coal. The skies were gray. This is absolutely true. And I remember going to Jinan, which is a different city in Shandong, and it looked like the sky was rippling black. Some days were above 500 PMI. Some days were above 800 if the desert sand was blowing in on top of the pollution. But all of that, like you said, has transformed. And the last 5 years, it's mostly blue skies. And now in 2024, 2025, it's almost all blue skies. I would say almost the only time the sky is ever not blue, it's because it's cloudy. The air smells resplendent, and that is because of a lot of different policies that have been implemented here in China's capital.
So, what do you think China has done over this 1 decade to sort of combat air pollution?
So many different things. It's not just one thing. I mean, when it was polluted, one thing China did is one thing Beijing did, for example, is the same thing that many cities like Paris have done around and other cities around the world. And that is have some license plates able to drive on some days and some license plates able to drive on others to limit the pollution. But obviously, that is only because it is so polluted. What China really did was building out its subway infrastructure. This is one component. So I don't want to say this is the only thing, but it really built out its subway systems. Beijing has more than 800 kilometers of subway. Shanghai has over 800 kilometers of subway. Most of the other 10 or 15 largest cities in China have at least 300 or 400 or 500 kilometers of subway. So I think that one thing that can be done in India that has already been done in China is the building out of infrastructure that doesn't damage the air as much, because increasingly India and China are both building out solar and wind. And so if India were to have a lot of its public transportation reliant on that new clean energy that is being built up, that would take a lot of the fossil fuels out of the air. India is also a champion in two-wheeled EV production like Tata and other companies. If a lot of those can move towards EVs and a lot of those can move away from ICE vehicles over time, that would also be transformative. Here in China, we know that there are big uh, car brands that are now developing non-ICE vehicles, non-internal combustion engine vehicles, EVs like BYD and Chery and so forth. And that has also helped transform the cities here in China. Another thing that is going on is moving up in the value chain in industry. China simply doesn't make some of the old things that it used to make. Now it's making more advanced technologies, and those technologies are increasingly reliant on clean energy. India has a great opportunity to skip past the industrial age that Europe went through and to move straight into clean energy. And I really think, along with a lot of other experts around the world, that India has the capacity and maybe the political will to leapfrog what the West went through and be transformed into a place that maybe China has kind of arrived at now.
What are the other practices that you have seen in other parts of the world? Like you mentioned Paris, but what are the other practices that India can draw a leaf out of?
I think India is already doing some of the things that I would like to commend. Like if you look at Africa, they have a great green belt project across several African countries where they're developing or they're growing forests where there were not forests, partially to control the desert, but also to do carbon capturing. China is in Vietnam and other countries are also leading in afforestation, the creation of new forests at the perimeters of deserts and wherever we can plant trees, right? So if India, and I know that India is also doing that already, India is one of the world leaders in adding new forests. So if India continues to pursue that path, along with other countries in the developing world, I'm sure that India will be able to arrive at a place that is a lot like what is being enjoyed in North America and Europe and China now.
But also, a lot of Delhi's pollution problem is due to the nearby regions, the nearby states. For example, you know that India is an agriculture heavy country, and Delhi is surrounded by these states who are mostly agriculture dependent states, for example, Punjab and Haryana. So, what happens right before winters after the harvest season is that they start burning out the agricultural waste products, and that sort of, adds to the pollution with the wind flow and wind direction. Now, I know for a fact that China incorporated the Beijing Tianjin Hebei model, right? So if you can tell us a little bit about that, that how did this coordinated three-city approach work with China?
A lot of slash and burn agricultural activities were simply banned in favor of mulching and other activities. What this really involved in China's case is the use of agronomists, scientist farmers who were trained in the cities, trained at universities, and went out to agricultural areas. And for the farmers that were willing to participate, learned new modern agricultural techniques. Obviously, burning is not just bad for the air, it's actually bad for the soil itself because the soil needs the nutrition that comes out of it.
Yeah.
So by mulching a lot of it and putting it back in the earth and using other processes and other crops and other agricultural techniques, farmers can actually increase their yields. So when you find farming communities that are willing to upgrade their farming techniques and others that are not, all you need to do is wait 1 year because the next year, all of the other farmers are going to say, I want that too, because the yields are so much higher. So it really takes the political will of the government to send these kind of scientists into agricultural areas of a country and teach farmers what they're missing out on. And when they realize they can make more money, they realize that it's in their family's interest to try these new processes. And I think that this can be replicated not just in India, but all over the developing world.
How do you think technology and if AI is helping in combating pollution?
Well, I mean, if you look at a lot of developing countries, for example, Namibia just developed a ground radar system for communication with satellites. Now, that seems like Well, there's a lot of people who are hungry in Namibia. Why are they wasting money on this technology?
Hmm.
Well, actually, by looking at how the earth is behaving, how the agricultural area is behaving from space, we can actually learn a lot about what yields to plant for next year or how farmers should react to the potential floods that might be coming. So there's a lot of technology that can participate in what we would assume is a not technological field. But in fact, agriculture is going through another round of transformation with the use of drones, for example, in dusting crops and watering crops and actually moving product yields up hills and down hills. I mean, both India and China have huge mountainous regions which are used for farming. And the use of large drones to move those goods takes the labor away from humans. And those humans can better invest their time and energy in other parts of that activity. And also, maybe just enjoy life, which is also a really important part of why we're all here. But I think it's not just about using new techniques. It's also, like you said, about new technology. A lot of people in the West are scared of solar panels right now because they think that solar panels are going to take the place of arable land, of agricultural land. But in
Yes.
China's case, it's actually planted them in deserts. And underneath those solar panels, which I've been to the Taklamakan Desert, the Sea of Death. And I've seen a 350 megawatt solar farm. And you can already see the beginnings of new life in the desert growing out underneath these solar panels. Now, there's not a lot you can do, but you can do things like have sheep go underneath the solar panels and graze over and eat the growth, which supplies lamb for the farmers who live in that area. It doesn't seem like a huge, big activity for us who live in major cities like Beijing and Delhi. But to those farmers who now have sheep who are getting free food from the growth of solar panels, it really is creating arable land for farmers while at the same time creating the kind of electricity grids that we need to take the fumes out of the air and make the air cleaner for our citizens.
Jason, I also want to talk about China's 50-meter inflatable dome. They had come up with it in Shandong, I think. The 50-meter balloon that sort of enveloped the entire uh, construction site. And, it was covering
Oh,
nearly
yes.
20,000 square meters. Was that practical? Did it help? Or, was it just not feasible enough?
It was incredibly useful. I don't think it's going to be deployed a lot because the reason these are deployed is because they're in very urban dense environments, and most of China's cities, urban areas have already been developed out. So most of the new construction that's taking place is in the area between the nebulous area between what is rural and what is urban, because a lot of areas of Beijing, for example, in Beijing municipality are actually rural. So it's confusing about what that is. But if you're in a highly populated area and you're worried about the effect on the locals, on the local inhabitants or the residents, businesses, and so forth, those can be used. What I was concerned about when I first saw that technology was what about the workers inside the bubble? And what I learned about that is they actually have massive air filtration systems to keep the air clean. And the main purpose of the bubble is to keep the noise from bothering the neighbors, not just the construction air, which is actually highly regulated for the workers inside of those kinds of domes.
Before I let you go, the Chinese government had sort of, offered that they can help India, especially Delhi, with its pollution problem. Um, I know it's just talking between two journalists, but how do you see China being able to help India in this regard?
This is a really interesting question. And I think this is a question for the politicians because us little journalists are not going to have a lot of say on this. But I've studied the Belt and Road Initiative and China's investment because it has $3.7 trillion of Forex money that cannot be taken into the Chinese mainland and must be invested or spent elsewhere. And so China is looking for places like India to park that money and give give concessional loans, in some cases, grants for the development of schools and other infrastructure. I personally, my own opinion is that India should take advantage of that and get as much construction going as possible. Now, I know that the concern for a developing country is we want jobs, right? We want to make sure that we have jobs. So we don't want a Chinese construction company coming in here and building our high speed rail for us. But
Yeah.
the reality of most of these projects is they can be negotiated such that the Chinese construction companies can JV, joint venture, with a local Indian company, work together, and over a preset determined period of time, decided by politicians and the business people at the table, transfer those jobs to local Indian workers, which will also do skills transfer. So India gains in a variety of ways. It gets concessional loans with no strings attached, unlike the loans that come from the IMF. And then it also gets skills transfer, technology training, and at the end of it, while there's only a 2 or 3 or 4% interest rate on a lot of these loans, India also has the opportunity to have the infrastructure. And one of the reasons that the air in China is so clean is because China has 48,000 miles of high speed rail. So, whatever city you're in, you can get to another city, no problem. No matter what kind of level economically you are, it's relatively affordable. India could benefit from that, not just for the people, not just because you want to visit your mom in another city, but because moving goods between one industrial park or in a port becomes so much easier. And this could be a major advantage for India as its economy matures and it climbs the value chain in manufacturing.
Absolutely, Jason. That was Jason Smith of the host of the Bridge to China podcast, talking to us about how China has pulled itself out of the pollution mess and what India can learn from its neighbor. Jason, thank you for talking to us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.